Well, again, thank you for coming back and welcome. And at this point, as we promised, we have another dynamic panel for you, which really consists of people long committed to addressing the systemic issues that drive our institutional inequities, from our under-resourced schools to our lack of adequate trauma care for so many young people in need, to a system of law and order that really promotes police brutality. And so we welcome all of our panelists this afternoon. And we're going to begin with Diane Wagenhals, the program director at Lakeside Educational Network. Diane?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been listening to some of what people have been talking about, and I'm very moved and touched by all of that. This is very important conversation. A little bit about me that might be helpful as we go forward with this. I'm a program director at Lakeside Educational Network, and we have 4 schools that work with at-risk youth, and we serve thousands of youth and through what we do with our schools. And also my main job is to write curriculum and provide training around the subject of trauma. So this is very, very near and dear to my heart as I share a few things with you. I wanted to note that this morning on Good Morning America, the television show, they were talking about the mental health problem with kids all across the country because of the pandemic and everything else that's been going on. So it's definitely in the news. This is definitely a timely topic that we need to address. So how do we equip our teachers? What do our teachers need? What is it that goes into this work that will help to change some of the outcomes for kids? And I've loved the stories that I've heard from your panelists who are describing personal life experiences. One of the things that I will share is, this will tell you a little about my age, I guess, but back in the 1970s, I was a teacher in an elementary school on a military base right outside of Washington. And every single student in my class had a parent in the Vietnam War. I didn't know then what I know now. I just knew these kids were not in a position where they could learn. They were distracted. They were acting out. They were very, very vulnerable, very, very needy. And it was, how do you figure out, how do you, at the age of 22 with kids that are 12 years old and 13 years old, very close in age to me, how do I help them? And I think that's the question that teachers ask today. While they're not having students, with many of them not having students who have a parent in the war, in a way we are in a war, and the war we're in is a war against the impact that trauma has had on so many lives of our kids. So what we have found as we've been doing work, I'm going to fast forward to what we've been doing at Lakeside, is training our staff at Lakeside to understand the nature of trauma and how it affects kids, and what do kids need who have had trauma in their lives, and equipping teachers so that when they see the misbehaviors in class. I think that in the title of what we were talking about today, it is about preparing teachers to recognize the differences between a trauma response versus behavioral pathology. And I would even question behavioral pathology, because sometimes we don't know when behaviors are actually the result of unresolved trauma. Let me share with you a couple of the very specific things you can look for as teachers when you see children acting out or behaving in ways that seem as if you're not quite sure why the behavior is there. That it can be the reactions that you will see in kids that have trauma. There's 2 ends of a continuum. On the one end is hypervigilance and hyperaggression that is the result of trauma. The other side is dissociation, which is when kids are just so out of it, they just aren't able to focus, they aren't able to be involved. Teachers need to know that they can recognize sometimes that these are symptoms of a kid with some unresolved trauma. Bruce Perry, who is an amazing neuroscientist, child psychiatrist, he wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. He's one of the leading experts on trauma. He has a program called the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, And we use it in our schools. We have all of our teachers get training in how do you know what a child's brain is all about so that you can help that child. I would love to see this in all of our schools where teachers had access to a way to look at an individual child and understand what is it that's going on in this child's brain. One of the things that Bruce came up with is his 3 R's. It's not reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's the 3 R's of addressing kids with trauma is to know that any child who's dysregulated, who's not in a place of regulation, they can't learn, they can't focus. When any of us, but especially when kids are dysregulated, you can't reach them with logic. You can't reach them with, you can't even have a relationship in a way with them because they're so caught up in themselves. And this is a hallmark symptom of kids with trauma. They very easily get dysregulated. Then you have the second R is the relationship that you need to be able to establish with kids. What is it that a child needs to be in a relationship before they can even begin to do reasoning? And that's the third R. Reasoning is a cognitive thing. Think about how different classrooms would be if teachers were assessing what was going on with the kids in the classroom. If they could pause and say, I think I have a student here who's really dysregulated. So what are the skills I need to use to help that student regulate? It would solve a lot of the problems, because if you go after a student in a negative way, in a forceful way, when the student is dysregulated, they're going to go into that hyper vigilant, hyper aggressive state, or they're going to dissociate and check out. Either way, you're not going to be able to reach the child. So how do we equip our teachers so that they can look at kids and understand some of what those kids need? We have also found that when you teach kids about their brains, they're fascinated. They love learning. Okay, I have these 4 major parts of my brain, and I have a couple other parts I can learn about that tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing. They can learn about things like the ACEs study without, you have to be careful. You don't want to, we're not trying to have teachers become therapists, and we don't want to alarm people with having them get their ACE score. I'm assuming people know what I mean by the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. If you want to know more about that, I'd be happy to give you some resources to learn about that. But basically, the ACEs study said that when there's childhood adversity, it carries over into adult life, and it tells us why kids are behaving the way that they are behaving. So I just really, I know also this about teachers and educators. At Lakeside, we've been providing our courses to the staff in the school district of Philadelphia. And one of the things we were told when we started to offer these classes, probably 8 or 9 years ago, was that it wasn't going to work, because we were going to ask teachers to come in on their own time after school and attend 2.5-hour trainings, sessions. Our courses are 6 weeks to 12 weeks long. And not only do you attend the class, you have homework, you have books to read and engage in all kinds of conversations. If you get to our 3rd course in trauma, you have to present case studies. It's a very rigorous training, all volunteer. And what we found once we started these classes, our biggest problem today is that when we're getting ready to register teachers, we post at midnight, whatever the date is that it's coming up, we post at midnight that a course is going to be offered. Several courses are going to be offered. People actually set their alarms to sign in, to register. And so it opens at midnight. By 10 minutes after midnight, all of our classes are filled with waiting lists. I think that there's a thirst out there from teachers and figuring out, how are we going to figure this out? How can we equip, because they're finding out that what they're learning works in the classroom. It equips them, it gives them, it was one of your panelists, Josh, in the last round was talking about the importance of love, the importance of relationships, that kids figuring out, how do you do those relationships? How do you nurture those relationships? Is something we teach in our classes. And because we have people coming over time, they can learn the depth and the comprehensive side of trauma and what it is we need to instill in our students and help and support our teachers as well. What is it that we need to do for that? So there's a lot of questions that came up when I was thinking about the day, and I feel like I'm rambling. I actually wrote a lot of things out, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I have a passion for nurturing teachers and everybody in the schools because they are on the front lines of this. It's an analogy for this is what's happened with the COVID 19, what we've been dealing with. If you equate that with what happens with trauma, there's a lot of ways you can line the two up. It's something that's invisible. Trauma is often, the effects of trauma are invisible. It is rampant. It is contagious. It is spread. It is something that, as much as people want a quick fix, we're not going to have a quick fix. It takes the efforts of literally thousands of people to try to figure it out. In so many ways, what we're talking about when it comes to what our schools need is similar to what we've been needing. And actually, the COVID thing is a simpler problem than trauma because trauma is so complicated. So I just circling back around to me as the teacher way, way, way back when the dinosaurs walked the planet. But there I was in a school at 22 with a group of kids and not knowing what to do with them. And my instincts told me that these kids, more than anything, they needed to feel loved and safe and protected. And then when they misbehaved, that it was for some good reason. And how do we work together to figure out what to do? I wish we had that for all of our teachers. I wish we gave them and equipped them with what it is they need to know so they felt really well prepared as they worked with students. Teachers want that. Now they can get burned out if they're not getting support, if they don't know that what they're doing is going to have effect. So we need to give them that educational piece as well. So those are some of my thoughts as we get started on this part of your session this afternoon. I hope that evokes some feelings of hope too, because what I have learned as I've done this over the years is that once you get the information and you get some skills and you have support and you have opportunities to process, amazing things can happen. So as I hear, as people are sharing their enthusiasm on a conference like this to say, we're feeling very enthusiastic about this, speaks to that. It speaks to that hope. So, thank you.
Thanks, Diane, for sharing your experience and for showing us what's possible when we do equip our teachers. So that was a really great, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Next, we invite Kevin Bethel, who's the Chief of School Security for the School District of Philadelphia, to share a little bit about his work.
And thank you for the honor of participating with the panel. I'll begin by talking about who I am very quickly. I am the Chief of School Safety at the School Safety, but I also, prior to coming here, came from a law enforcement background. I served almost 30 years in the Philadelphia Police Department. I was a deputy commissioner for the last 8 years under Commissioner Ramsey, and I ran the patrol operations for the city of Philadelphia. And one of the things that really would change my trajectory in 2014, I was asked to be part of a national model to look at juvenile justice and young people in a different way. And I was brought to into Chicago and different places, meeting with groups, talking about what law enforcement could be doing different, particularly in our youth setting. I had a passion for working with young people. And I recall going through these sessions of trauma sessions and development and understanding brain science. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, what are we talking about here? I'm a cop. I was raised, consequences or what is the scenario that we live in. Trauma. I grew up in a single parent household with mother who raised 4 boys. And so I had my own trauma. And so, but what I just dissected, and the more I got involved in, I realized I was raised pretty well, and I wasn't inflicted with much of the trauma that I would see many of the kids in my environment. That would take me into a whole different trajectory. I retired from the Philadelphia Police Department in 2016 because I got this burning part of my soul that said that I had to be different, that I had to figure out a way that how do we keep young people out of the system and how do we not expose them to the trauma of the system and work with them in a different way. My work would take me into to start to look at the school to prison pipeline. I was working with a fine judge from Clayton County, Texas, who kept nudging me and saying, the Southern judge, like, what are you going to do in Philadelphia? And so before I retired from the Philadelphia Police Department, I started a school diversion program to really look at young people and saying, why were we arresting 1,600 kids a year in the school district? But more importantly, why were we exposing them to the trauma of that arrest when it was totally unnecessary? And the downstream consequences, the collateral consequences of those arrests were to me, I didn't even understand that. I never imagined as someone who was running the operation that I was allowing that to occur. And it was a self-reflective moment for me to say, hey, you know, we have to look at the criminal justice system in a different way, that it can't be about penalizing, that we have to create second chances for young people and just people in general. And so that would really start me on a path to travel around the nation, really talking to my law enforcement colleagues, talking about, you know, we have to do things different. Here in the city of Philadelphia, we went from a school district that did 1,600 kids being arrested to last year, 265. We've made an 84% reduction in our school-based arrests. And now, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but and expanding that work. But I would spend as a Stoneleaf Foundation fellow traveling around the country. And I can't tell you how at times it was very disheartening to understand that, you know, that we had been, we're leading this, we're the front end of the system. And as a result, you know, we're the ones who have to take a hard step back and understand our role in society now. I mean, is it all about the warrior and punishment, or is it more the guardian and the person who's supporting and helping our communities? I would offer that the latter represents the lion's share of our work. And so, you know, really we have to start to lean into that work. And so I've continued to lean into that work as I was, as I indicated, I was a fellow, and then I started a nonprofit, Law Enforcement Juvenile Justice Institute, because I wanted to really try to dominate this space, to really educate my law enforcement colleagues that the issues that many of our young people and the anger that they have at us really starts at the beginning. When I lock up a 10-year-old child and bring him or her into custody, a 10-year-old child. I mean, when you think about that, just even thinking about a 10-year-old child who came into school with a butter knife today, and because they had a weapon, we would take that child and put him or her in a cell block and fingerprint them and photograph them and hold them for almost 6 hours, you know, and then we wonder why we have so much anger. You know, that 10-year-old child could never appreciate me as a law enforcement officer, because at the end of the day, he says, well, did you ever ask them whether I was being bullied yesterday? Did you ever ask them if I'm eating? Do you know that my dad beats me every night? And my mother is unfortunately, you know, on drugs. I mean, all those underlying things just not happening. And so where I have really landed my passion, and what's brought me back to the school district to be chief of school police, is really focusing on how do we do this process differently? How do we do, from a law enforcement and a safety perspective, how do we do something different? In our diversion program, we work with young people we don't arrest them. So a kid who comes into school today with that same weapon, we don't arrest that child. We divert that child. We're working with the Department of Human Services. We take this trauma-informed approach that we don't need to bring them into custody. We don't need to further any harm to them, but we need to get them into service to see what the root cause is. Is it because they're being bullied? But as you know, and I know your audience knows, oftentimes, you know, we find those underlying issues. And I work with the Department of Human Services as part of our diversion program to say, can you go to the homes? And so we have social workers that actually go to the homes, and you all know what we find there. You know, I used to tell people I thought I was poor until I came on the police department, so I went to some other doors. And then I said, oh my God, that's poverty. And so they work with those young people to really get them to support the things that they need. Grandmothers who are there trying to raise 5 grandkids because their parents are not around and they need help. And so that has been our work in the school district, because I now lead an effort here at the Philadelphia School District to re-envision our safety. You know, and we've created these 5 pillars, but, you know, the top of that pillar for us is restorative practices. And so we have now made that the bedrock of who we are. You know, trauma training, you know, for our men and women, working with the university, Drexel and other universities to help us to understand positive behavior interventions and supports, and how it can be a more supportive role, mentoring with our young people, youth courts, looking at multiple ways to, one, not just keep them out of the system. It's bigger than that, right? It's not just about not putting a kid in the system. It's about what are those needs and how can we meet them at the point of contact, because oftentimes we may be that person that they come to for help and supports. And so as we go through our revisionism work, that's what we're looking to do. And so I look forward to the panel. I look forward to more questions around what we're doing. And obviously I can talk about law enforcement in general as well. But my work is now really focusing on how we can work with young people, give them second chance, sometimes third chances. And so we can get them to that place where they can be very productive in our society and go on and do well. So I'll stop there and wait for the panel.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your call. That's what it feels like to me, and your passion for keeping these students away from the trauma that this kind of incarceration would cause. So thank you so much for that sharing. And we invite David Harrington, the leadership team member for Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project.
Okay, how y'all doing? So I'll just start off by just talking about my story. I won't be long because I know I ain't got that much time. And I'll talk about like the work that I do and what our organization do. So yeah, my name is David Harrington, and at the age of 16, I was locked up and charged as an adult, sent on State Road at Pick on the juvenile side. I did 8 months in there, and during my time in there, I got involved into YAS, which is the Youth Art Self-Empowerment Project I'm working for now. And during my time up there, I never really did poetry. I did poetry only in school, but I never wrote a poem about like what was going on in my life. And a friend of mine was telling me that Sarah come up every Saturday, which is our co-director, and do art and poetry workshops. So I went to the program, and at the end of the program, it made me feel good just writing poetry and sharing my thoughts on what's going on in my life. And it made me feel free. And at the end of that program, Sarah was letting me know how she could offer me a job and support me on my court date. And I had a D-cert hearing coming up. A decertification hearing is when you finally get sent back down to the juvenile system. And I got my D-cert. Sarah spoke to the judge for me, wrote a letter, and I came home. And I came home, I contacted Sarah, and ever since then, I started working with YAS, and I've been going back up, before COVID, I've been going back up to the adult jails, doing art and poetry workshops with the young men and women that's locked up and charged as adults, speaking at middle schools, colleges, canvassing in the community, and just doing what I can for the youth. And so like with YAS, we a youth-led organization that go into the adult jails and do art and poetry workshops. And we support our youth in any way we can. We also run something called the Youth Participatory Defense Hub. A Youth Participatory Defense Hub is a community-based atmosphere when we teach the core steps and processes of a case to a young person and their parents. We help them. We do court support for them. We write the judge for them. We try to help them find jobs. We also try to help them get back into school if that's something they want to do. We also create something called the social bio video, because when you get locked up, all the judge and DA know is the charges, but they don't know who you is as a person. So the point of the social bio video is to paint a different picture of that young person. So we interview mom, grandma, coaches, teachers, and anyone that's like real important in your life. And also, as of now, since we've been running the hub, we created something called a Youth Hub Fellowship. So all the young people that we working with in the hub, they are able to, we basically hired them to help us run the hub too, because we give a space for all young people to be leaders. So that's just that work. And also we are launching the first restorative justice in 2021. We're working with Impact Justice. And the point of that is basically restorative justice is basically like, if a young person causes harm and the person who caused harm, we will like try to have them in a sit down to figure out what that young person need and figure out what the other person need. And I think that would be very useful because it could create peace depending on how the situation is. But I feel like it could create a good space for the two, because now we could figure out what this person need who been harmed, and we could figure out what that person need who caused the harm, and the person who may have been harmed might have a kind heart to help the young person, or whatever the case may be. So yeah.
David, thank you for being willing to share your own personal story and also the beautiful work that you're doing. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also from the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project, we have with us Deshawn Harden, who's a youth organizer. So we welcome you, Deshawn.
Okay, my name is Deshawn, and I'm a youth organizer with the Youth Art Self-Empowerment Project. And I will be telling my story, and then also the campaigns that Yaz has going on. Okay, again, my name is Deshawn Harden. When I was 16, I was charged as an adult with multiple robberies. I was sent to Pitt, just like as David was. I was at Pitt for a year, and while I was in duration of that time, I met the workers from Yaz, and just like how David said, it was a lot of poetry, music, a lot of things that actually expressed my feelings, and I liked it. Later on, I wound up getting sentenced to 5 years, and I was sent upstate prison at like a real young age, so kind of ain't really lived my teenage life. Also, I was not able to get bail. Like, the bail was unfair. I was given a $1.6 million bail, so that was kind of impossible to pay because also I was living in poverty. Well, I came home December 2019. I met one of the Yaz workers, and they asked me to come to the Yaz headquarters, and went there to see how the hub worked. The hub was what David actually explained, and I liked it. And I talked to one of the co-directors, Sarah, and she wanted to give me an interview and gave me a job, and that was a blessing because I was looking for a job, but it was like kind of impossible because I had a felon and I was on parole and everything. But there I am now. I'll be talking about like what actually like got me, like put me in the situation, and that's called Act 33. Act 33 is a law that was created in 1995 that allowed young people, like juveniles under 18, to be charged as an adult. And it was also invented around like the hard on crime and also the Central Park Five. If y'all don't know what that is, that was like the 5 juveniles that was charged with a rape in New York. So that was kind of like a real serious situation. So they was real hard on it. And now we got a campaign that's trying to repeal Act 33, and we working with like multiple organizations. One of them is Youth Sentences Reentry Project. So we actually trying to like get to the point where we can abolish juveniles being charged as an adult. Also, we got another campaign called Carry Not Control, and Carry Not Control is like we talked with a statewide task force to try to also change the law for juveniles not to be charged as an adult, because we feel as though if you label as a juvenile, the charge of juveniles. And we working with the Village Art and Humanity, and that's like a organization that's helping us out. And they want the same thing, want to like end the youth incarceration and like juveniles not to be charged as an adult. And actually, we trying to also just not juveniles to be locked up. Period. We really feel as though that juveniles should be canceled because you know how a lot of young people are like very impatient and everything, so they mindset kind of move fast into what they thought. So that's what actually led them to get in some type of trouble. But we feel as though that they shouldn't be sent to like upstate and everything. So also, I'm sorry. Just like what Sarah, she actually put the link in the chat. That shows more on the Carry Not Control. It got videos and demands and everything. Now what else can I say? Yeah, but that's what we really focusing on. So I think that's all I can say right now.
Deshawn, thank you again for sharing your story. And then also it's wonderful that the youth that you're working with have you there as a role model. So thank you. Thanks so much.
I think.
And we now invite Leroy Hall, who's a principal at Houston K-8 school in Mount Airy, to join us.
Okay, great. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you for just inviting me. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and the great work that they've already described. I'm excited that, we have people in this area that are, working so hard every day to just get students their best opportunities. So first and foremost, my name is Leroy Hall Jr. I'm a lifelong educator. I taught 8 years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I taught primarily, I did 3 years when I moved. My wife's from Philadelphia. I'm from Pittsburgh. So when it was time to pay the piper, we moved to Philadelphia. I taught for 3 years as an administrator. I was an administrator for 3 years in some charter schools in Philadelphia, one in North Philadelphia, Waukesha Charter School, and one in Mount Airy called Kepler Charter School, which is an African-centered education institution. I'm currently in my 7th year as a school district of Philadelphia principal, and I'm currently also a student as well. I'm a student in a doctoral program at Drexel, and I teach at Chestnut Hill College. So I was really excited. I do teach a course on leadership and change, so I was excited about this opportunity. When I'm thinking about transforming justice, I think of it in 2 categories. Think of it as one, the larger system, and then I also think of kind of the teacher's heart. So what I mean by that is currently ever since the unfortunate demise and murder and lynching of George Floyd, there's been this new openness to systematic change. And I think for me, when I think about just being in a leadership role, being part of certain committees and groups that seem to be influential in making some changes happen, I kind of want us to place more time on the overall bigger systems that are currently in place. I feel like there's 2 narratives that are going on right now, which is good. We need them both. You have the systematic change, which is, laws that are, too hard on certain demographics, on certain crimes that only affect, certain demographics exponentially more than others. You have some other systematic things when it comes to education that need to change that I'm going to talk about. And then kind of the heart side is trying to change teachers' hearts to make sure that people are not, displaying their bias without being cognizant of implicit bias that may be there. Encouraging teachers to pick out certain, culturally appropriate books to make sure students are learning from, things like that. So I think, as we kind of look at both of those, to put more on the systems will end up bleeding into the change. So that we need from our teachers as far as their hearts. So when I look at some of the systems that are currently in place at Houston, we're trying to tackle a lot of these problems. We do not have all the answers, but we're currently working with our community partners, working with our network, working with our school district to make sure we're tackling these items. One of the things that I kind of talk about when I explain the curriculum side of things is if everyone can kind of think along with me and then fill in the blank. In 1492, Christopher Columbus did what? You don't have to say it. In 1492, Christopher Columbus did what? Most of us popped in our head, sailed the ocean blue, right? So that's my way of explaining to people that we all have been part and subjugated to a school system that has programmed us to think one certain thing, whether or not you like it or whether you like it or not. So it's not that Christopher Columbus didn't sail the ocean blue in 1492. It's the second part of that comes across as discovering America, other things that have now been proven to be untrue, right? So when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to systems, we have to make sure that we're teaching from an accurate lens, not from, some of the systematic things that have been put in place to purposely make people view themselves in a certain way or make people feel like second-class citizens or make another group feel like they're first-class citizens compared to other citizens. So I took a quick textbook excerpt just to give you an example. This is a quick excerpt out of a book that was developed in 1954 called The History of Georgia. And the text says, this is describing slavery. And this textbook says, the master often had a barbecue or a picnic for his slaves. Then they had a great frolic. Even while working in the cotton fields, they sang songs. The bear of the music and the richness of their voices made work seem light. So that comes from a book called History of Georgia that was developed in 1954. It was used for decades. And there's similar books that have possibly a remnants of that miseducation that still is in our in our curriculum to this day. So, there's been some states that have given us some blueprints to follow, such as Illinois State Board of Education has convened a work group to review and revise the overall state curriculum. And they have a checklist to see, okay, are we teaching students about, African-American leaders? Are we teaching them about African inventors? Are we teaching them about people of color, not just Africans or African-Americans, just people of color, period, that have contributed so much to our society? In 2015, there was a study of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And what they found is that the majority of people in our school system only know 5 to 6 people when it comes to Black history. You probably all have the same people in your minds. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Frederick Douglass, Barack Obama, George Washington Carver. So when it comes to exposing our students to excellence, to Black excellence, those are some of the systematic things that I think funnel down into students feeling a certain type of way about themselves, students having higher self-esteem, things of this nature. Another area I think when it comes to reform is just staffing. So there's a clear lack of representation of teachers of color in school personnel. According to a 2016 Department of Education report, only 10% of public school principals were African-American compared to 80% white. 82% of public school educators are white compared to 18% teachers of color. In addition, Black male teachers are only 2% of the teaching workforce. So once again, that's a systematic thing that as we have all these great thinkers together, I think those are some places where we can really get a lot of change. Last couple of things here is just discipline. As we know, students are disproportionately suspended based on race. Officer Bethel, phenomenal leader for the School District of Philadelphia, he describes a lot of the things that people are doing now to kind of offset some things, even when it gets to law enforcement at the school setting, when it comes to discipline. One of the things that we try to do is restorative practices. We want to make sure we also have a positive behavior support plan for our students. We're a PBIS school, so we have incentives. We want to congratulate students for upholding the values of our school, but then also embed that you may not get a reward for upholding the values at our school. So it's kind of it's a thing that you're supposed to live by, not something that you automatically get rewarded for. But we do make sure that we reward students for doing exceptional, so we can set the standard for everybody else. And last but not least, I think is the area of special education. There's wide spread disparities in disabilities identified by race and ethnicity in our country. And there's no research that supports conclusion that race and ethnic disproportionality in special education is due to differences in socioeconomic status between groups. So you may have certain students of the same socioeconomic status, different racial backgrounds. Those students in the students of color are, being disproportionately placed in special education compared to their students that are not color peers, of color peers. So. And then, when you think of all of those systematic changes that need to be done, when you think of, the initiatives of getting, that anti-racist curriculum in our teachers' hands, so they can do some soul searching themselves and then reflect on how they're delivering content, I think the lack of funding that occurs within our schools makes that even more of a challenge. So, you're already behind the 8 ball because you have all these systematic things that are from outside of the school are affecting the students in the school, but then you're behind because you're, down, 25 miles out, those students have one-to-one, they have air-conditioned classrooms, they have computers one-to-one, they have smart boards in every class. But in your school, students may not have a one-to-one situation, or may not have smart boards, may not have AC, have extremely cold winters, extremely hot, summers. So, funding is another challenge. I'm really excited and encouraged by the moves that the School District of Philadelphia has made during this pandemic. I think what happened with this pandemic is it really exposed a lot of the inequity amongst our school systems, because you have one school district that's doing one thing for their kids across the state. Pittsburgh's doing something totally different than I'm hearing than Philadelphia. But Dr. Height has made it a great point to make sure that every single student in Philadelphia has the opportunity to have a Chromebook, laptop, and also has provided every single household with the opportunity to get a hotspot. And the reason why I say opportunity is because there's at least one laptop for every single kid in the School District of Philadelphia. There's at least a hotspot opportunity for everybody in the School District of Philadelphia. And I say opportunity once again, because some parents already have a laptop. When we think of the School District of Philadelphia, it's important to understand that it's not a monolith. There's a lot of different people with different backgrounds that have variation of economic situations. Some of our parents, students of color, our parents are like, no, leave that for some other child. We have, 2 laptops at our house. So, it's some students have laptops already. Other students, if you didn't, we can get you one. So I think, the School District of Philadelphia has made some great efforts in trying to curb some of this inequity, definitely during this pandemic. And I'm just excited to be part of this panel to continue to build on that work. So thank you for having me.
Great. So thank you all for your presentations. And so again, Atif Bostic, I am not Michelle Lesher, again, doing a phenomenal job. And I know we're going to see her back very shortly. So it's my privilege and honor to be able to moderate the remainder of this panel. So at this time, we're going to actually ask each of the panelists to unmute and also to turn on their videos so we can get into the discussion. So while we're waiting to get into the discussion and for all the panelists to unmute and turn on their cameras, I'll start by starting to pose the first question. This question, and I was torn because this is, again, a phenomenal panel. We have experts from various areas, and I have about 15 number 1 questions, right? So it's trying to figure out what the first question is going to be. And actually what I want to do is go to the chat for the first question to set us up here. And so in the chat, someone asked for David and Deshawn, what was school like before you were incarcerated? Earlier today, in our first panel, we talked about the school to prison pipeline. And so the audience is very interested in understanding from you and your experience with being justice involved and being impacted by that. What was it like before, in your school experience, before you were impacted by the criminal justice system? And I'll defer to either one of you that wants to start.
Yeah, I can get started. What I can say is classrooms was packed. Hard for the teacher to teach because other students would most likely need help, or you got some that's class clowns or whatever the case may be. So it would be hard for the teacher to teach. The classrooms would be packed. Too many students in one classroom and just only one teacher. Too many different personalities too for one teacher to deal with. That's how school was for me. It was very packed.
Yeah, for me, same as David. Yeah, school was packed, and also school was kind of like they had the same thing going on that was outside the school. Of course, people selling drugs. They kind of stopped from guns coming in, but they had cops. It's they had the security, so. A lot of fights and everything, so it was violent. So it was crazy because especially the type of environment I lived in. So the same kids that I lived around with I went to school with them also, and so it was. I did have a little hard high school time, but I still always did my work. I graduated with honors and everything, but I graduated while I was. And state correctional institution. I graduated up there. But yeah, it was a little difficult to be honest. Yeah.
So if I can challenge the two of you, and so I'll start by saying that I'm from, and I'll start the way I normally say it, I'm from North Philadelphia, right? North Philly. But you're probably checking my references right now because I didn't say North Philly, right? NORF. So you're probably questioning whether or not I'm really from North Philly. As I say that, but I am, right? So Strawberry Mansion is where I grew up. I did go to do two different high schools. I went to engineering and science, and then later my family moved to Bucks County, and I went to Central Bucks High School East. And we'll spend some time talking about the disparities between the different schools, whether it's within the city of Philadelphia or it's the suburban counterparts of our schools. So so we'll talk to Leroy Hall particularly about that in a little bit. But I say that, I give you that background and say that I'm from North Philly because I want to challenge and push you a little bit in your answers. And, you talked about the classrooms being packed, but I would love, and I think the audience would love to hear from you and learn about your experience of, what was the peer pressure like? What was it like in the first panel? We heard about one of the panelists that in middle school, there were metal detectors in middle school, and that actually shaped his thinking. So did anything happen in school that shaped your thinking that may have led to bad decisions, right? Or decisions that may have been made? So I want you to really think through and really dig deep to say, what influenced me to end up this way, particularly if I experienced that in school?
When a personal story of me was when a teacher told me I wasn't going to make it nowhere. I wasn't going to make it nowhere far. That was very personal for me. That's what made me want to get my diploma and try to be successful in the best way I can. When a teacher told me I was going to fail, when I feel like the teacher is supposed to uplift you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, with me, I did I got the same response from him. Like, a teacher did tell me that I ain't gonna be nothing because sometimes I used to like bust jokes. I wasn't heavy like on the class clown, but we used to just bust jokes and everything. Also, like, I really didn't get like the peer pressure, but I kind of got like a competition vibe in the school. Like the kids, like, everybody want to be the flyers, get the most girls and all that, all that crazy stuff. So like living in the environment, like I'm from North too, so yeah, so like the environment I live in, like I ain't really like have it like that, like, so that sometimes I had to get it my own way. So it was a time where I was like on a drug, like in school, like, to be honest, like I was young and I was just wild, and so like that led like to like me getting in like some type of trouble. So high school was hard. That's why I said that, like, school in the streets, it really wasn't no different, because a lot of things that was getting served out there in the streets was allowed in the schools too.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and I think that's important. So with what you're sharing, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And so with that, I actually want to go over to Leroy Hall, Principal Hall, for a moment. And I would love for you to react to that, but also react to that in the sense of, what you're hearing and what that experience is within the schools today, but also from the perspective of the disparities, right? So I mentioned I went to Central Bucks, first before that, engineering and science. And engineering and science, when I was going to school, was a whole lot different than Gratz, right? And so there's disparities that exist within Philadelphia. And then there's disparities that exist even outside of Philadelphia. So when listening to what David and Deshaun just described as their experiences, particularly with what they experienced directly from teachers, and that could lead them that way. And at some point, I do want to dive into, and one of my first questions was really about to be around trauma. So I see Diane nodding, because Diane and Kevin, you both talked about trauma, and that was going to be my first question, but we kind of got to let this way. So I'm coming back to you. I just want to put you on notice that we will talk about trauma in a moment. But before we do that, I do want to go over to Principal Hall to respond and react to that in listening to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing that came to mind was when the question was asked, like, what did you see? Once again, it goes back to my earlier thought. It's like, what did you not see, right? Like, did you have an opportunity to see, role models that look like you, kind of relate to you? Are there people involved in the community that, is the school engaging the community? I'm not saying there was or was not, but those are some of the things we want to, reflect on. I feel like when it goes back to the teachers, I think that's part of the work that we were talking about earlier with the anti-racism, work where teachers, that same teacher may have not even may have had great intentions. A lot of teachers get into the position, because they really love kids. It's not for the money. None of us really got into it for the money, but, he or she may have not even understood how sharply their words may have come across. That sounds like they would probably be cognizant of those words. But, overall, I think there are some teachers that are not really fully in touch with, the language and, using as some people say, language of the oppressor, when you're saying certain things or using certain language when you're talking to students to build them up you're breaking them down when you think you're building them up. But one thing that really stuck out during Brother Harrington's testimony earlier that made me think about it was, he said, that made me think about something related to this, was just the overall focus on the whole child. And I think that when we start developing, when our teachers develop those other skill sets in students and start valuing the whole child, is when they start seeing, the beauty of children. For him, he said, not as a child, but, as a man, he said, it made him feel good to start writing poetry. In our schools, giving students an opportunity to tap into those talents that they've been given to build up the self-esteem. I think when you start teaching, the whole child, when you start bringing up those qualities, they start feeling better about themselves, which means, now you can apply that confidence to some other areas of your life as well. And last thing was another thing that stuck out, whole child was just the idea of the bio video you were talking about, Mr. Harrington. Very impressive. Once again, that idea is from a legal stance, showing this is a whole person. It's not just the guy you think, was in the wrong place at the wrong time that night with his friends who had a bad idea. Like when you start uncovering it, it's like, oh, that's really the story. It's like, no, he just wasn't like an arm, right? He wasn't lookout. He was completely bewildered by this whole situation. He didn't know his boy was going to pull a gun out at the corner store, type thing. And then when you talk to his coach, you talk to his teachers, it's like, no, that's not John. That's not the John I know, Now, that's not saying he didn't make a bad mistake and shouldn't pay a consequence for it. But I think that once again, it gets back to that whole idea of this is a person. This is not just a singular act that should define this person, right? So if a child is poor in English, okay, maybe there's some other things to that. But did you know that child actually loves writing because he loves poetry, right? So it's like kind of getting to those other areas, those areas that we don't often look at, and really start pulling those out. So I'm excited that that's starting to happen.
Great, thank you for that. And I think that makes tremendous sense in the way you just articulated and described it. So we definitely appreciate those comments. And I want to take this now. And I think that both Mr. Harrington and Mr. Harden did a great job in articulating and setting basically the foundation for this conversation. So I want to go over to Diane Wagnos just for a second. And what I heard with David and Deshawn, I heard a lot of trauma in what they said. And so I would love for you to talk about that, and talk about that also not from the first perspective of what you heard. So, because again, being trained in and to have not the background that you have in trauma, please, I don't want to venture to say that, but having a little bit of experience with trauma, I heard a lot. But I know our attendees may not necessarily have a background in understanding and seeing trauma, especially at the level that you have, or at the level that Kevin Bethel has as well. And Kevin, I apologize if I call you Keith later on. I almost called you Keith. I know your brother, so I apologize if I say that.
That's fine. Don't worry. I'm okay with that.
Okay, so because I almost did it, I caught myself.
Everybody does that. Everybody.
But I would love for you to react to that for our attendees.
One of my thoughts when I was listening to these two very fine young men talk was just how important it is to share stories. Part of healing of trauma involves being able to have your narrative, your story be heard. And so to me, it's a privilege when people are trusting enough and risk sharing stories. So when we think about what is needed when it comes to understanding some of the really foundational basics of trauma, to be the receivers of another person's narrative, to invite them and to respect and appreciate their underlying needs and issues and strengths. So when I was listening to the stories, that was what came to mind, was just as a trauma principle, we need to respect and honor how important narratives are. So that was one thought. I actually kind of had a question too, because both of you talked about being told you weren't going to be successful, to kind of give up, that you were given very, I think what I heard was some pretty negative statements. And yet that actually turned, it sounds like that became a motivation to say, no, that's not the way it's going to work out. And it gave you some, I'm hearing resilience in that. And I was just wondering if you wanted to share, where do you, when you think about your life and how hard you've had to work to get to where you are right now, what promoted the resilience in your world? Not to turn into the moderator here, but I was just really curious, because there's a lot we could learn from what happened to you.
I feel like we've been getting doubted our whole lives, as being like just me being a young Black person growing up in the city of Philadelphia. I've been getting doubted my whole life, and just believing in myself and knowing what I wanted to do with myself. I think that's just what kept me going. Like, for me to be young to feel that way, I think I always had that courage as a young person. Like, no matter what nobody tell me, I know what talents I have, and I know what I can do. And I always just like, I talked to my mother about the situation, and like, she gave me confidence and everything like that. So I feel like that was another thing, and just believing in my own self and letting my teacher know that, you know, I could prove them wrong, and which I did. And she ain't had nothing to say after that. So I feel like I won that situation, and I feel like I can go farther and beyond, especially with the work I'm doing now. Like, ain't no telling where I can go with this type of activist work. I just know that.
That's really beautiful, and it speaks to a trauma principle. It's about relationships.
Right.
And you need, if you can have one significant relationship, somebody who believes in you and somebody who encourages you and has confidence that and speaks to you about your rights.
Right.
You know, you have the right to be who you are. You have the right to find your gifts and talents. When you hear that from someone you know loves you and cares for you, that it almost puts a protective shield around you.
Yeah, and also just not even like just from family, like it's my team I work with too. We always build each other up and try to encourage each other. Everyone in the group, we an organization, but we look at each other like more of a family, and
Wow.
support each other and other things. Like if there's other stuff we got going on besides activist work, they support you in that.
Mm. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
And with me, yeah, I heard that from like teachers and everything, and yeah, that motivated me like a whole lot, because you know how like I feel as though like a lot of teachers might just come there just to leave for real, just to get their check and leave, and like not to really just to educate, especially when they feel as though a lot of young adults getting arrested and getting murdered, so they feel as though like they're not gonna go nowhere with it anyway. But always had that hope in my heart anyway. Like, I wouldn't let anything have me get hopeless, because I know I achieve by waking up in the morning. So I ain't never really gonna stop me, like whatever I want to accomplish. So, and just like how like David said, like the team I work with, like they really like motivate me like a whole lot. Like, this was like a huge accomplishment, especially like the way how like the work I do, trying to change the future. Because if you change the youth, you changing the future. Like that's the main thing you're doing. Like, you changing young kids, you changing the whole future. Like, and it's like a huge passion to me. And I know for sure, like if my teachers knew what I'm doing, right, that teacher that told me, like, hey, you're not gonna be nothing anyway. They see what I'm doing now. They probably wouldn't even see it. They just probably just nod their head and just keep walking. Like, because of course I want to like talk to them and like, look what I'm doing now. Like, I'm happy to see you though, but I don't know if they still gonna be hating. I don't know, but I hope not. I hope they clap their hands to me though. But I love my team a whole lot. Like, and I really don't like think about that no more, because that really did, just like I said, it motivated me. Like, it just made me look back. Like, all right, look what I'm doing now, and that's a trophy. Like, it's like a big trophy for me.
I see your smile, and I hear a passion that this has created in you to make a difference. So the things that have happened to you that have been difficult, while maybe you wish they didn't happen, they actually have empowered you.
Yes, it empowered me a whole lot, because I know I was so young. And for me to go through all of that, and my team, I didn't have a chance to go to college and none of that. Man, of course I can go to college now, like if I wanted to, but just me being arrested, being so young, I missed all my teenage years, and like I do not want no youth to go through that ever. I don't want them to ever go through that. Like that was like a little harsh time I was going through. Like, but I just, like I said, I woke up day after day. And for me to come home, to wake up and work with Yas, to work with the Youth Art Self-Empowerment Projects in Philadelphia, where a lot of kids get arrested and a lot of kids are going through poverty and lack of education. It's just amazing. It's amazing. So I love the work that I do.
And I'm thinking too about role models in your life. And I see something in the chat that's about the question about fathers. And so looking both at yourself in terms of your own image of your father or males in your life that influenced you, and also thinking about how you would like to influence as a man children, whether they're your children or other children, that, you know, where that, how important it is to be able to identify with the strength of a man.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
men.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's real hard, because I grew into a man inside the prison. Like I had to really grow into a man inside the jails. Like had to stand up for myself and everything, because there was a whole bunch of men in front of me. I can't be the only boy, so I had to like just toughen up, put the big boy drawers on, and just walk. I ain't really walk with no chip on my shoulder, but I just walk how a man's supposed to walk. Like, and also like I got a child on the way. Like I acted real fast. Like I'm about to have a child on the way in December. So, and I came home 2019 December. So yeah, that was real fast. And I can't wait. Like I can't wait to show him. Like, thank you. I can't wait to show him like what I'm doing now. And I don't want to show him no wrong. Like that's just I want to be a perfect dad. Even though that might be impossible, but in my head I think that's possible. So I'm trying to complete every check in a perfect dad book, and just show him that like what I'm doing. I will tell my experience, like what I went through, and then what I'm going through right now is me trying to change the future. And hopefully he'll look up at me like, wow, I want to be like my dad. But as my dad right now, not my my dad, teenage dad, the dad I am now.
Your current dad.
Yes, the current dad. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that I am looking forward to. Like I feel as though I am a role model, and also I do got role models. Like like my father, he changed his life too. David, a role model of mine too, because he went through the same situation I went through, and look at him now. So like we all like is like succeeding, and that we actually want to change and look forward to seeing a better everything like for the youth.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna jump in here now, and I apologize because we're having such a great conversation. I think it's vitally important, particularly the last question about role models, particularly where your father may have played a role in your life, and I would love to have more conversation around that. So I'm actually going to ask us. There's questions there, particularly in the chat. So you guys, I want you to respond in the chat, have that conversation. Also, there's questions that exist in the question and answer as well that I want you to engage in. But I do need to move the panel along a little bit to make sure that we focus on that topic. So David, I want to apologize because I wanted to hear your response to that. So I want to apologize in advance, and no slight to you. Just I'm unfortunately having to move on. The panel.
I understand.
Yeah. So we do have to move on to Kevin, Kevin Bethel for a moment here. And so, Kevin, I want you to not necessarily sum this up for us, but you've heard some very interesting things. You heard about the trauma that exists. You heard about the experience that exists. You heard about the systemic issues that exist outside of your purview, right? The things that you don't control. But now it's your responsibility to the point of some of the earlier Spanish enforce and manage, control and do these things. So I would just love to hear, your comments and thoughts as you hear about what leads up to the point where you may become engaged in the process, and how this has in the past influenced your thinking, how this may have influenced your thinking today, and how policing in general should be influenced by this dialogue that we're having and the experiences that that you've heard from both Deshaun and David this afternoon.
First and foremost, I just applaud you giving David and Deshaun the platform to talk. Oftentimes I get on these panels and they get overwhelmed in this space, and because I think what you find oftentimes is what I didn't do, right? I mean, if I take you to the old school of policing, was dots on a map, and you attack the dots and get rid of and attack the crime, and really never slow it down to get to the real root issues that are the underlying problems. And I know my colleague Principal Hall and Diana have eloquently talked about that. And so I think for us in policing, and me in particular, is part of the. I never did this, man. I never really. I mean, I grab a kid, man. I did it in an ad hoc way, but we didn't do it in a really strategic way to say, for trauma. Like for me, I couldn't understand all of the brain science, right? And so a great doctor said, just do this, Kev. Just ask the question, what happened to you? Don't ask them what they did and why they did this. Ask them what happened to them. And so it became a very simple process for me, right? To say, well, what happened to you? But part of that, what that opened it up for us and what law enforcement has not done historically and what is trying to do now. And listen, we got a long way to go. Don't get me wrong. But recognizing that we're not going to wrest ourselves out of any of the issues in our communities. We're not going to and so we can keep saying that, but it doesn't. We've gotten smacked back multiple times to tell you that's not going to happen. But what we have to do is slow it down and listen to the street, right? We have to slow it down and listen to, there's a time when Deshaun, I wouldn't give him a time of day. And I'll be very frank about that. Oh man, you out there doing, oh man, I ain't got no time for you. You know what I mean? And then I sit back, but if I sit there and listen to Deshaun, I'm like, oh man, he's the exact cat I want to lock up, get locked in with, right? Because he has so much credibility in the street that I could do so much with him, right? Me and him could rock. If he takes me in as a friend and I'm a friend of his and friend of yours, when I walk into that space and he says, hey, Kev is cool, he's down, then all right away, he's going to introduce me to a whole group of individuals. And so part of us is understanding that we got to get to these roots. We have to understand it, right? And so I came to that space of really saying, and the trauma that goes in with that. Like when I sit there, when Deshaun said he's locked up, I said, man, what is it like for a child at 16 years old to be locked up, no matter what he or she did for 5 years? And he talks about how he becomes a man in prison. How does that happen? You know what I mean? And he's been good, but so many of the guys won't get on the other side like Deshaun. They won't turn their lives around. They'll just stay in that space. And so what I often try to tell my colleagues is that we create this environment, right? We know that if I lock up a child today, that his recidivism, him coming back, is very high, but we still do it. We know that if I do these things, the results are continuum. So part of what I say is really saying from a law enforcement perspective that we have a responsibility now. If we really, I think Principal Hall talked about this movement that has come on by, right? There's young people who stood up and said, we ain't taking it no more. We're not going back to listen, I know my dad and all of them, when I was a young kid, I was told, don't mess with the cops, don't say nothing, don't look at them, don't smell, do whatever they tell you to do. Well, these young guys today that's not the world they coming at. They're saying, listen, your power comes from me. And that you need to recognize that the power comes from the people and that we regulate that. We give you the authority to do what you do. And so as I came to recognize that in policing, that my power didn't come from Kevin Bethel. It came from the community saying, it's okay for you to come into my community and police me. And so part of that, we have to now change the paradigm and saying that as a result of that, we need to get in and understand what our community needs, the trauma that our community has, and how our policing intersects with all of that, because there's a need for policing, but it has to be done in a way that's respectful, that has empathy, and that understands the people that we're serving. And so I know I collage all that together, But I think it's important that your audience understand there are agencies moving in that direction, but we have a long way to go. I mean, my Commissioner Ramsey used to say policing has been on the wrong side of the law longer than it's been on the right side of the law. Yeah, I mean, because Kev, we enforced the civil rights laws, right? And we enforced all of those things, and so we have a long way to go before we can build the trust in our communities. But I think meeting it at where it's at and where it lives, meeting these young men at where they are, understanding where they come from and the challenges they face, and give them the accolades to say, "Wow, man, you got over it." Like I watched them light up when Diane says something about Deshaun and what he's doing. And when Deshaun gives David a compliment, he cheeses right up. Like I see a role model, like, wow. You know what I mean? And so even looking at them now, I mean, you can see the energy they bring, and we have to do a lot more of that.
And can I add to that real quick?
Certainly.
Yeah, so real quick, just going off of what Chief Bethel just said, I think, he's capturing a great idea, which is not just being the question started off with kind of assuming that, well, I understand why you asked the question, but it was kind of like, hey, now Chief Bethel, your role is to enforce when people are breaking laws, right? But I think ultimately his mindset is the exact mindset we need, which is not just being reactive to situations. You gave an example of, walking up to the neighborhood, having, building a relationship with Deshaun, and then because of that relationship with Deshaun, then building a broader relationship with the other, community members. And I think that's the big picture. It's like being proactive with the community, continuing that community policing. And then also, yes, we do have to, just like I have a conversation with, whoever, Derek, but if Derek keeps on cutting, I'm going to tell him like, listen, my man, like sooner or later, I will have to jam you, that type of thing. But so it's not that, you're now void of expectations and rules and, disciplining, enforcing those rules and laws, but it's just being on the front end and creating those relationships. And I think that's very encouraging to hear.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I want to thank the entire panel. So I just want to make a couple closing remarks. So I don't know if everyone realizes this, but we spent more than an hour talking about this. And for me, it did not feel like an hour, because I think this is an important topic. I think that the passion that each of you bring to this and bring to the work that you do is infectious. We need more of what all of you are doing in this space. And I do want to, make special comments to David and Deshaun and say, as the young people on this call, and going back to what Kevin said, that it's not a lot of time that space is created for young people. And when we do, and when I have the opportunity to say this, I want you to know that that we love you, that we appreciate you, and we have your back. And so if it's ever anything that you need, don't hesitate. So I want you to know that regardless of whatever any teacher, anybody ever told you, that you take up and you deserve the space that you occupy, right? So I want you to know that and go forth with your power and understand that and be great. And to the rest of the panel that kind of like situated, we're up here a little out of the way. Thank you for all the work that you've done that have paved the way for these two gentlemen, and the work that you will do to continue to make space for them and others. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle Lesher. And thank you for all of your time. Don't hesitate. Please go back into the chat. Please go into the question and answer, type out some answers. Please engage with the audience. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your presence with us. And at this point, what we'd like to do is try to take a little bit of a step back and really begin to try to weave together some of the threads from this amazing and powerful day. And to help us to do that, we've invited two people who have really been listening and listening very well, as all of you have. And so at this point, we're going to invite Dr. Patricia Way, who is the program coordinator of Restorative Justice Program at Chestnut Hill College, and Reverend Hannah Capaldi, Minister for Faith Formation at the First Unitarian Church, to lead us in some of that conversation. And as Tricia and Hannah are doing that, if there's something that is burning inside of you that you want to share with the group, we again invite you to post any of those thoughts or insights that you'd like captured into the Q&A box. And so now we invite Hannah and Tricia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi. My pronouns are she and her, and I work at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. It's a privilege to have been with all of you today and to hear your stories. I'll tell you, like, my heart is beating so fast right now because it is full. It is full, and I feel it in my stomach too, just like what this day has been of listening to stories and hearing the ways that everyone is trying in their own capacity to pull the levers of change and to make justice real in this world and in this lifetime. I'll just introduce myself a little bit more. My investment in this work is I worked for a few years as a teacher and administrator at the Bedford Hills Women's Prison at the college program there, which is run by the Marymount Manhattan School. So that was sort of one of the ways that Tricia connected me into this. And I have a lot of love and deep commitment to the work of the prison, of taking down the prison industrial complex and all its myriad manifestations. Tricia, did you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. So I'm Tricia Way, and I'm an assistant professor of justice studies here at Chestnut Hill and organize the restorative justice program, as Michelle mentioned. I'm also a volunteer with a program called Just Listening, which trains people in listening justly, and then offers listening as an opportunity to build relationship and live in mutuality with people. And there is a Just Listening volunteer program at the prison at the State Correctional Institute at Phoenix, of which I'm a part. And so I've been putting those listening skills to use today to help weave together some of the patterns that have appeared in all of the different, with the speakers in the different panels today. Hannah, did you want to share first, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I can go real quick. Just a few things that I had noticed and stuff that came up for me. We talked about trauma a lot, and that came up over and over. And one of the things I think about is the way that trauma makes children, puts kids and adults alike into survival mode. And there's really no space for imagining or playing or hoping even when you are stuck in survival mode. And I was thinking so much about all the ways all of these people that we've heard from today are responsible for holding on to that vision for what a kid could be beyond a person just in survival mode, and how it is so crucial for us to be the people that say, I'm going to hold that vision for you about what could be different in your life. And I see that you are suffering, and I'm going to tell you, look up to the horizon of what it could be different. And I think there's so much that's needed right now around imagination and a different moral imagination. And I saw so many people in all the different panels really talking about how, like, the courage it takes to forge a new path when everyone just assumes that the status quo is fine, and the bravery it takes to question and suggest that things could be different, and to really even consider yourself empowered to be some of that change in even the smallest circle of your life. So yeah, that's what I have right now.
Thank you. Some of the themes that I heard as I was listening, and I might be charged with being biased, but for me, the theme of listening was threaded throughout the day. That perhaps one of the most basic things that we need to transform justice in all of the different places where a different justice is needed is listening. I heard from several of the adults speaking that we need to begin by listening to ourselves, to listen really introspectively, to ask the questions about how we as adults in places of positional power are actually complicit in the various systems of injustice that we've been talking about today. So I think that we need to listen to ourselves as we're thinking about how we may plug into the different ways in which we can transform systems or change systems. We need to do that introspection. And then it was really apparent that we need to listen to the people in the places where these injustices are playing out the most harshly. In places of poverty, in places where the criminal justice system is coming down disproportionately hard, in schools where we are not listening to the young people. And then from the young people that we heard, it's amazing how much can be transformed when we do begin to listen. It just was amazing to me to hear that it almost didn't take very much at times to just shift into a place where we just hear the trauma where people have come from, the trauma that they're living in, and whether that is because you are marginalized because of poverty or because you are experiencing violence, a variety of different ways in which people are experiencing trauma or marginalization, and that we can begin to listen. And other common themes that I heard today. So listening was like I heard it when it wasn't necessarily overtly mentioned, but also healing. I heard the word healing mentioned so many times throughout the day. Healing. And I also heard the word work, that we have work to do. We're doing work. We're engaged in the work, but there's much work still to be done. That this is not a passive, it's not a time to be passive. It is a time to do that introspection. It is the time to listen. And then it is the time to do the work, to engage together, to find those fusions, as Reverend Theo Harris had mentioned. And also, I want to give a shout out to Representative Rab's grandmother, who said we all have a role to play. And that really, I liked the sound of that. And so we all have a role to play in this introspective listening and listening to one another and finding where it is we're going to do the work to transform all of these different places of injustice that need to be transformed to justice. So yeah, those are the threads that I heard from our time together today. I also feel really full and grateful for having been able to be a part of it.
Thank you both. I think full and grateful are definitely two words to describe this day for sure. So thank you. Thank you for that insight. And at this point, I think we are going to turn the conversation back to Sister Kathy and also to Atif for their final remarks to bring us to closure today. So thank you, Hannah and Tricia, and Kathy and Atif. We look forward to hearing from you.
I know that as I just listened to Tricia really weave the threads together from our day, I simply want to say that I too feel in awe of everything I have been able to listen to. So that gift to be a listener has certainly lifted me up. I'm watching the logo for Uplift in front of me and feel that it is so fitting right now to realize that this second annual Transforming Justice Conference has been successful because it has invited us to both change our hearts and to change our behavior, just to deepen our commitment to work, as we are reminded again by Tricia, as what lies ahead of us to do, and we will do that together. So I feel that the sense of being uplifted from the bottom up, as Liz Theo Harris said, is something that happened in me. The voices I heard from those who have suffered from poverty and who have borne discrimination because of the racism still present in our country, that they have lifted me up with power that we can make a change. And so I simply want to say that I am more than grateful. I feel there is a movement of transformation happening, and may it move from me in that self-reflective way into those that I can in any way affect and work with to continue this work of transforming justice. So thank you so much.
Sister Kathy, thank you. And I just want to say that today has been very powerful for me as well. With all that we're dealing with in this nation, with the civil unrest, dealing with the pandemic, We think about the police shootings that happen almost, weekly at this point. Yet, just like I made in my first remarks this morning, we move forward. Yet we're resilient as a country. Yet we continue to work toward justice. And today was just another example of that. We had great and tremendous leaders that shared their experience, not only their professional experience, but their personal experiences with us. And hopefully everyone's taken something from today that they can now take and internalize and then make that part of them and go forth to do even greater work. And that's the intention of what we do. I would be remiss if I didn't take this time again to recognize all of the amazing people that made this happen. Again, I want to recognize my co-founders, Sister Kathy Nerney, who's done phenomenal work, and the passion that she has for this work is just unimaginable, and it's unmatched in what she does and wants to do for this community in this world. And so, Sister Kathy, I just thank you for that. I want to recognize Lauren Barrow, whom you haven't heard from today. You've heard her name earlier today, but works tirelessly at this work as well behind the scenes to make this happen. And I just want to make sure that does not go unrecognized. Lauren, thank you for all that you do, because without you and all that you've done today, that no one's seen, this wouldn't have been possible. So thank you for that. And then I also want to recognize two more individuals that joined us along our journey this year. And that's Tricia Way and Kathy Smith, who came right on board as we started to plan for this year. And their work has been unmatched as well in what they've done to make this event possible, and the work that we needed to do to transform this conference from being in person to being virtual. And you've heard from Tricia in this last panel, but again, behind the scenes, very similar to Lauren, you have Kathy Smith that again has worked tirelessly to make this happen. And then this would not have been possible without all of our panelists that have come on and given of themselves unconditionally. And so we thank you for that. Thank you to the young people that we heard from today, David and Deshawn, in really sharing your stories. And please know that we are here for you. So with that, I just want to close and say thank you again for attending this event. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for the work that you will do. We look forward to staying engaged with you throughout the rest of the year, and we look forward to seeing you again back here next November. Have a great afternoon.